So it's great to have Tom, Cheryl, and Greg all together now for a panel discussion. So we've heard various things from each of you. And one thing that came out of the discussion so far, I think, is the idea of grabbing opportunities when they come. Now, for many young people, I suspect you think, well, you three were really successful because things happened, you were lucky. Well, luck is part of this, but I'd like to maybe tell us a little bit about what you think about how you would exploit an opportunity if it arrives. So is there a way you can be in a better position to make the most of a lucky break when it comes? Can I ask Greg first, please, on that one?
Yeah, I think the key is to be as prepared as possible for what the job might entail. If you're employed as, for example, a musical director, the chances are you're going to have to do more than just play the piano. You're going to need to know the full vocal score. You're going to need to know a little bit about the arrangement, a little bit about the orchestration. You're going to have to be prepared to change keys for songs, particularly if you've got celebrity casting. Everything has to be around making sure that they're as comfortable as they can be musically. And so simply being able to play the piano and being able to read the notes that are in front of you isn't enough. You've also got to have ears all over the place. You've got to be able to hear. I mean, it's like trying to listen to an out-of-tune engine in a traffic jam sometimes, because you have to be able to pick things out that somebody might have mislearned, and then the more they do it, the harder it's going to be for them to relearn it properly. So you've got to be constantly alert and constantly aware in the rehearsal process. The vast majority of re-employment will come from the rehearsal process rather than the performances, because that's the time when you'll have the director there, you'll have the choreographer there, you'll have the entire creative team, and that's the time that the producers get daily reports of how the show's progressing. Once it's actually up and running, all you're really doing is babysitting it and maintaining what you've taught.
That's great. Cheryl, can I ask you? I know that you had the most amazing, either good fortune or because of your talent, to win that competition for the orchestral piece. It's quite difficult at that age, surely. So you just ran with it. I mean, tell us, that was a lucky break, but how did you exploit that? How did you make the most of that, do you think?
Wow, I think I was very lucky that I got commissions from that opportunity, because it was a big exposure. And I remember working really, really, really hard at school to complete those commissions. I mean, I had to sort of work every night late at school after doing all my other work, and it was exhausting. But I just really tried to grab that opportunity and do every opportunity that was given to me.
That sounds like good advice. Yeah. Tom, can I ask you about lucky breaks and how you've made the most of those in your career?
Come back to what Greg just said, actually, about the rehearsal period being probably more important for career development than the performances themselves. I think that's absolutely true. I think one brilliant piece of advice I was given by a very, very well-established orchestral player was that the first performance is actually the first rehearsal, and that you turn up prepared as if you're about to perform. You don't turn up learning the part on the job. You don't turn up in the first rehearsal blagging it, because actually the notes should be sort of settled straight away. You just sort of play through kind of on the first go, and then you refine it to the point where it sounds great for a performance. But if you turn up unprepared, no, you won't get booked again. That applies not in Greg's world and in my world, that the two, you don't turn up unprepared for a first rehearsal. And that really is linking to what Cheryl said as well. It's just about ridiculous levels of hard work. When you're young, when you're sort of setting out, you cannot work hard enough. It's impossible to, and sadly, that can involve, exhaustion and burnout, and you can get stressed over it. But it is a necessity. At some point, you do have to absolutely flog yourself. I think what happens is, with opportunities and luck, is that when you're young, you tend to say yes to everything, and that's a good thing. As you get older, your gut instinct tells you what you should say no to, which is just equally as important as what you should say yes to. And that's a process that you refine over the years of working out what you're good at. I worked out through the hard way what I wasn't good at by making some pretty bad blunders and some kind of career errors. And I made sure that I didn't go back. But you never know unless you try it. That's the thing. And you can do it as long as you turn up to these things with the right attitude. You're prepared, you've done the groundwork, and you're prepared for that kind of first meeting with these people. That's fine, you know, and then you'll realize in that setting whether it's right or wrong for you. And in the future, then you can say yes or no to that work. But I think when you're starting out, you can't say yes too often, and you can't be overly prepared. There's no such thing as being over prepared.
Good answers, thank you. While we're talking to you, Tom, I've got another question really, and it's partly about flexibility, because what I've been struck by with the interviews is that you all have expertise in an instrument, and you mostly started in that way. But that flexibility is impressive. And so you said in your interview, Tom, about if it has strings, I'll try and play it, which was a really nice line. And the fact that, you know, the banjo, you wouldn't expect the banjo to be part of your repertoire. But what's fascinating is, I'd like to know, to put you on the spot, I suppose, is this natural ability or is this necessity? Are you naturally able to play lots of things, or is it because you think, no, I'm going to have a stab at it? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there are a banjo and a guitar. There are the kind of fundamental similarities to how you play them. However, I think the phrase I used was, "If you can pluck it, I'll play it."
I think that was it. Actually, you're right.
Yeah. Actually, one instrument that doesn't lend itself actually nicely is a mandolin, which actually suits string players much better. Violinists much better, just because of the way the left hand works and the tuning. But actually, I do know musicians who, regardless of the kind of physical process of making the sound, whether you blow the instrument, whether you play it with a bow, whether you play keys, or whether you pluck it, I do know people who can transfer from one instrument to another with such ease. I find it remarkable. I was never one of those, but I think transferring between instruments, I mean, it is, if you want to go into, in particular, playing a lot of the experimental music that I've done over the years, being able to play, in particular, electric guitar as well as acoustic guitar is absolutely fundamental. Because also, I'm not sure if Cheryl's written that much for guitar, or even if she's written for guitar at all, but once you start to work with a composer, they want to know, especially if it's an instrument new to them, they want to know what the opportunities are on that instrument, that you can kind of expand the composer's mind. And I've worked with lots of composers, and they are very often drawn to having lots of instruments on stage just because of the sonic possibilities. So that's how that came about, was that people would say to me, can I put a banjo part in with this electric guitar piece? And I would say, I don't play banjo, would you give it a try? Okay. And it turned out I absolutely loved it.
Good
open
answers.
I suppose that is, instead of just saying, no outright, I'll give it a bash. If it hadn't gone to plan, and if it had been rubbish, basically they wouldn't have written a banjo part in it, because the composers have the ultimate control.
I think I'd like to move straight across to Greg, because it strikes me that of all our panelists here, you have probably been most flexible, and most of your work's been self-taught. Tell us a bit about, is it natural talent with you, or is it the necessity? What do you think?
Well, I think there's a basic language which, once you can understand about music, and it doesn't matter the way you understand it, it just matters that you understand it, that once you have, you can apply to a lot of different things. And actually, the skill sets aren't necessarily limited even to just music. But certainly once you can play the piano, it's very easy to work out by listening to things what instrumental ranges are. Once you know what their ranges are, you can kind of work out what might be difficult for them to play. Once you know what's difficult for them to play, you start to be able to think, well, I need this person to play this particular part, and so on. And certainly in the arranging side of the work which I do, I nearly always now write specifically for people who I know, based on what I've picked up about the way their instruments work. For example, there's no way I could ever play a trumpet concerto, but I know what all the fingerings for all the notes on the trumpet are, so I can make sure that I'm avoiding particularly difficult things unless I want a very specific sound. For example, I mean, guitar is a complete mystery to me, because I can never understand how you can make so many sounds out of so few fingers. I mean, it's a totally bizarre world. So again, I tend to write for a guitarist a shape of what I want and important figures or phrases, and then let them deal with it. So I don't think it's necessarily completely talent. It's an ability to understand the language that you're writing in.
That sounds really good. And
Can
Cheryl,
I just come back to Greg on that, actually, because I did, for a very brief period, Greg, do some West End touring shows. I did Starlight Express and I did the Assassins Sondheim. And the MD would say things like, for example, oh, can you play that in kind of, really gritty, deep South 1920s blues style? And then you would get someone else to go, on this passage, could that kind of be flamenco style? And that actually comes from understanding not only just the musical language, but kind of a breadth of listening. Just having a kind of, I think to get by, you can't just listen to your one chosen field of what you want to specialise in, not just classical music. It's critical, actually, in your musical training. What do? To listen to an enormously broad range of musical styles, because, when someone says, yeah, could you kind of give that a sort of Scott Joplin feel? Yeah, okay. You've got to be really well listening.
okay. The next section of questions really is to do with our current situation. It's extraordinary, the situation we are in globally. This broadcast would normally be live. We're actually using Zoom technology. You're watching this in your home rather than in your school, your college or classroom. And so I've got a few questions to put to our panelists about the current situation. So each in turn, if you would, and fairly briefly, how are you coping with the enforced lockdown? And have you taken up new hobbies or returned to old ones? Cheryl, can we start with you first, please?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, life hasn't changed at all for me. The only thing I'm doing is I'm doing Pilates and step in my house rather than walking down the road to the gym. Other than that, I mean, it's been hard to concentrate. The first week I was addicted to the news, and now I'm just forcing myself to tune out of it because I've got a lot of work. I've actually gained work in the current situation because I've been commissioned to write a piece for Livestream. So right now I'm pretty my career is pretty coronavirus proof. I guess I'm a bit more concerned about the future when arts funding is maybe more strained, but at the moment, I'm very used to tuning things out. I have to sit at my desk and write all day, and there's lots of things bothering me or worrying me, and I just have to say, look, just tune it out, do your work. So, in many ways, it hasn't changed at all.
Okay, good. Tom, can I ask you next, please? What's it like for you?
Well, the first period was awful because it just involved non-stop cancellation. I had 3 days where I did nothing other than cancel things and be part of organisational statements that were agreed by teams that were then put out on social media to say that all of these events had been cancelled, and things that I was I'd organised or that I was due to play in or that I'd been part of as a artistic director or as a kind of a coordinator, that was just non-stop cancellation. I just got utterly depressed, to be honest, for the first week or so, and then I just deliberately dropped out of emails, which I've still not fully caught up, to be honest, 22 days later or whatever it is now. I didn't enjoy the first part at all. And then there's the issue I've got with I'm homeschooling 2 children as well. I've got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old that I'm trying to homeschool, and I'm actually still working full time. And actually, as luck would have it, I am still going out of the house every other week to go to the Radio 3 studios to broadcast. So there's some degree of normality in that sense. And actually, now I think I'm resigned to it, as opposed to I'm not happy with the situation, but I haven't taken up any new hobbies. No. If anything, I've had a hobby limited because I've got I've trapped a sciatic nerve as well in my left leg, so I can't go running, which is my only kind of outlet to get rid of all the frustration of being locked away all day long. So I can't even do that. So I've just resigned to it. I'm not pleased about it, but I'm just trying to, what I'm trying to do is maintain some degree of normality. So some degree of routine. So I get up and I don't lounge around in pajamas. I get dressed and I approach it as if it is a normal working day, and I treat weekends as if they're weekends. although I'm not even sure what date is today. It might even be a Sunday. I've no idea. I have to check Google Calendar every now and then to work out what date it is. Yeah, but yeah, I'm just resigned to it, I suppose.
Okay, good. And last but not least, Greg, how are you coping with this lockdown?
Well, for me, this has wiped out 100% of my employment, because all of my work is done in crowded buildings. So, you know, whether they be theatres or whether they be schools or whatever. So I'm using the time to kind of learn things which I've promised myself for the last 25 years I would do. Like you can see, I've got Logic on in the background, which I've been desperately trying to learn how it works. And I'm now doing some remote recording sessions with some of the musicians that I work with regularly. But I am quite enjoying the opportunity to spend a bit of time at home, because obviously in my line of work, for instance, over Christmas period, I regularly do 100-hour weeks, sometimes for 10 or 11 weeks at a time. So it's actually quite nice to be at home in the garden with the chickens, eating food at a table instead of on a train or on an aeroplane. So yeah, it's kind of making the best of it, really. And trying to take it as an opportunity to improve other skills which I've neglected.
Okay, that's really helpful. Many people watching this, many young people watching this, will be worried about their futures, worried about missing out, worried about their grades. I think at times it's quite hard to realise when you're 15, 16, 17, 18, that there's a lot of life ahead of you. What advice would you give to people who are worrying at the moment about what if they don't get into university straight away? What if they don't get a place in college? Any thoughts on that, any of you?
Well, I mean, I teach students at Conservatoire in Manchester, so I teach at the Royal Northern College of Music. So my students are aged between 18 up to the oldest, I think, a 27-year-old student. And I remember in the last sort of economic crisis, which is obviously what coronavirus will ultimately turn into, as an economic crisis as opposed to a health crisis. It's the economic crisis that will follow. And when the huge banking disaster a decade or so ago, I remember then people talking about a generation of opportunity wiped out because of, there just won't be the same degree of opportunity afforded to people because of austerity and so on. That didn't actually materialise. People adapt. Some organisations didn't exist. Some venues couldn't cope. They had to fold. Some organisations couldn't continue. They had to fold. But generally, people found ways around it. And it takes time. But in actual fact, there are a crop of absolutely sensationally good musicians currently in Conservatoire in this country who went through a whole period of primary and secondary school which had been hit by austerity, and all of the supposed kind of no more opportunities for that kind of generation. It didn't materialise. It's actually turned out to be just about okay. It's a different landscape, but the creative industries don't give up easily. They will adapt and they will bounce back, and in some cases, with refining and pruning, some will come back even better, in better shape than they were before. It's going to be a very tough period, and there is a case of kind of survival of the fittest, sadly. But it didn't happen 10 years ago. It hasn't happened in previous recessions. People always find ways to adapt.
Thank you. I've got a final question for all of you. So have a quick think about this, because bearing in mind our audience are going to be wanting advice and help and support. I know they are. So what would be your 2 top tips to share with any young person watching this video, wanting to pursue a career in music? 2 top tips. I think probably, can I turn to you first, Cheryl? Is that possible?
Yeah, I'd say, the not giving up thing is the major thing for me, and recovering from knocks. So for instance, when I've had terrible reviews, I felt like giving up and I've just sat in bed and eaten crisps for the weekend. Then get up, start again, pick yourself up. You can get over it and you will succeed in the end. The other thing is, because in my specific career, I rely on performers to make my music come alive. I write stuff on the page, then I need performers. So just really, really, really respect the people that you work with and do everything you can to be as professional and organised and as full as respect for the people who make your music come to life as you possibly can.
Really good. Greg, what about you?
I think the first one is to never lose sight of the fact that music's fun. It's a means of communication. It's a way of expressing yourself. It's a way of interacting with people. That really, I can only think of sport as being a kind of equivalent area that does all the same things. So even while you're sitting there desperately trying to work out what notes are in an E-flat melodic minor scale, please try and remember that it is fun. And my second top tip, and I mentioned it earlier in my interview, is to listen to as much as you possibly can. Don't be afraid of any type of music. I remember when I was a young person, I was continuously getting hassled for listening to Mozart symphonies when I ought to have been listening to Nirvana. But actually, I had a great time doing it. So don't be afraid of any kind of music. Listen to folk, listen to jazz, listen to baroque, listen to whatever you like. Just enjoy listening.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Tom, what are your top tips?
Well, the tips you've heard so far are the ones that I'd probably as my top tips, to be honest. But if I was to put another one in, it would be the most destructive thing you can do is compare yourself to other people. It's an absolutely terrible trait. We all do it. We all have heroes. We all have kind of, whether that's, famous people or whether it's, people within our circle of friends and family, we have kind of, figureheads that we look to for inspiration and so on. But the worst thing you can do, I remember doing this at a young age and looking at somebody and reading their kind of biog and seeing they've done all these amazing things and thinking, I've only got a year before I achieve that, I'm nowhere near that yet. And what I would say is that what I see with teaching very often is, if you think of like kind of a hierarchy, kind of at the very top of this pyramid, when you get to music college when you're 18, you kind of put people into a hierarchy and you think, well, that person's better than me, but I'm better than that person, and that person's better than them. And you kind of have this kind of pyramid of brilliance, and you might be in the middle, or you might be quite arrogant and put yourself at the top, or you might have completely low self-esteem and put yourself at the bottom. What I've seen so often over a 4-year period of training is for that to just turn completely upside down, and for the kind of the people who just put the effort in rise and rise and rise. And the worst thing you can do is go, that person's better than me, therefore they'll have a better career than me. 4 years of training and the early part of a career, you watch how things change just through effort and hard work, and how the right tuition and going to the right institution to study, just watch what happens to you. That's where the kind of real talent starts to shine.
Thank you all of you. Hopefully you've enjoyed watching this. My thanks go to, first of all, our excellent guests. Thank you very much, Cheryl, Tom and Greg. I'd like to thank Mark Manford from Peterborough Films for his technical skill, his ongoing support and his wonderful can-do attitude. Fraser and Steph from Festival Bridge have actually helped make Creating the Future happen. And it's their website, the Festival Bridge website, where these and other resources can be downloaded. And most important of all, thank you for taking time to watch this video, and hopefully to have asked questions with a link at the bottom of this broadcast. And hopefully we'll get back to you with answers. But thank you for watching and good luck.